Aliens scanned a human warship. What they saw left them terrified. Part 1. First Contact. The Deep Space Monitoring Station hung silently against the backdrop of stars, its curved metal hull reflecting the faint light of a distant sun. Inside, Science Officer Kim stared at the display screen, his three-fingered hand hovering over the console. "Station Chief, I'm picking up an anomaly in Sector 7, Kim reported, his outer eyelids blinking rapidly. "Unknown signature, approaching our border at sublight speed." Station Chief Yoon glided across the monitoring chamber, her hover harness humming softly. The Tarek Collective had maintained peace in this region for over 300 cycles, largely because few species possessed the technology to reach their territory. "Classification?" she asked, leaning forward to examine the readings. "Uncertain. It's using a propulsion system I've never seen before." Kim adjusted the sensors. "Definitely artificial, definitely a vessel, but strange." Yoon's skin patterns shifted from calm blue to cautious yellow. "Run a standard identification scan. Perhaps it's a trading vessel from the outer rim." The station's powerful scanners activated, sending invisible beams across the vacuum of space toward the approaching object. Within moments, data began streaming back. "Receiving initial scan data now," Kim announced, his voice betraying confusion. It's a ship, yes, but unlike any in our database. The hull composition is primitive, mainly metals and composite materials. Yet it's traveling at speeds that shouldn't be possible with such technology. Other technicians abandoned their posts to gather around Kim's station. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as more readings appeared on the display. "Curious," Yoon murmured. "Run a comprehensive scan. I want to know everything about this vessel." Kim activated the Collective's most advanced scanning technology, capable of penetrating almost any known shielding. The station hummed as its power redirected to the scanning arrays. Minutes passed in silence. Then the scanner chimed, indicating the scan was complete. Kim's hand trembled slightly as he opened the data package. His skin immediately paled to ash gray, the Tarek equivalent of shock. "Station Chief, you need to see this," he whispered. The detailed schematics of the approaching vessel appeared on the main viewing screen. The ship was long and angular, with visible weapon systems dotting its hull. But it wasn't the weapons that caused Kim's reaction. It was everything else. "This can't be right," a junior technician muttered. "The internal temperature, the radiation levels, the atmospheric composition." "It's correct," Kim said quietly. "We're looking at a warship, but the beings inside, they're living in conditions that would kill any collective species in minutes." Yoon stared at the screen, her scientific mind racing to understand what she was seeing. The vessel maintained internal radiation levels that the Tarek used only in shielded power cores. Its life support systems generated an atmosphere filled with corrosive oxygen. Most disturbing of all, the ship's internal gravity was nearly twice what any collective species could comfortably tolerate. "Are they machines?" she asked. Kim shook his head. "No, biological. But unlike anything in our records, as they watched, the scan revealed more details about the ship's occupants. Bipedal beings moved through corridors, seemingly unaffected by conditions the Tarek considered lethal. Their bodies contained metals and chemicals that should have been toxic, but instead appeared integrated into their biology. "Look at their medical bay," one technician pointed, voice breaking. They cut themselves open and repair damaged organs. They replace body parts with artificial ones, and they survive this process." The control room fell silent as the implications sank in. These creatures treated physical trauma as a temporary inconvenience, not a catastrophe. And their weapons? Kim zoomed in on one section of the ship. "They've harnessed nuclear reactions not just for power but as weapons. They've weaponized the very forces that create and destroy stars." Yoon's hover harness drifted backwards slightly as she processed this information. The beings on this ship existed in an environment the Tarek would consider hell. They modified their own bodies through procedures the Collective would view as torture. They wielded energies that the Tarek approached only with the utmost caution and respect. "Send this data to High Command immediately," she ordered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "And prepare a first contact protocol." First contact? Kim looked up in surprise. Should we not simply avoid them? Yoon's skin patterns shifted to resolute green. A species that can survive such conditions, that builds ships of war as their means of exploration. We cannot simply ignore them. High Command must decide our approach, but I believe we must understand them, or at least try to. As the data transmitted to Tarek High Command, the monitoring station continued tracking the human warship. The crew watched in fascinated horror as the daily routines of the ship's occupants played out on their screens. Beings that thrived in poison, pressure, and radiation, conducting drills for combat scenarios the peaceful collective had never imagined. "Whatever they are," Yoon said softly, "we must approach with extreme caution. They are either the most resilient allies we could hope for, or the most terrifying enemies we could imagine." The message from the border station arrived during the night cycle. By morning, the entire Tarek High Command had gathered in the central chamber of their orbital headquarters. 12 senior officials sat around a circular table, their skin patterns displaying various shades of concern as they reviewed the scan data. High Commander Su stood at the head of the table, his aged frame supported by an advanced hover harness. For over 40 years, he had guided the collective through peaceful expansion and scientific advancement. Now he faced something entirely new. "Is this data verified?" he asked, looking at Science Director June, who had spent the entire night analyzing the scans. "Triple verified," June confirmed, her voice tight. "We even sent a stealth probe for secondary confirmation. The readings are accurate." The room fell silent as the holographic display showed a three-dimensional model of the human warship, the UNS Dauntless, according to markings on its hull. The ship rotated slowly above the table, internal systems exposed layer by layer. "It makes no logical sense," said Defense Coordinator Han, breaking the silence. "Look at the design philosophy. Every system has at least one backup. Some have 3 or 4 redundancies. They've built this ship expecting significant damage." "Who builds a vessel expecting it to be damaged?" asked Resource Minister Cho. "The waste of materials alone is incomprehensible." June manipulated the display, zooming in on the ship's power core. "Their primary energy source uses controlled nuclear reactions, similar to our own. But look here and here." She highlighted several sections of the ship. "These are weapon systems that use the same principle. They've weaponized the very process that powers their vessel." Several officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "What about the biological scans?" Commander Su asked. "Tell me about these humans." June changed the display to show the internal layout of the ship. Hundreds of human crew members appeared as heat signatures moving through the vessel's corridors. "They call themselves humans, yes. They are carbon-based like us, but with significant differences." June pulled up comparison charts. "Their skeletal structure contains calcium, a metal. Their blood uses iron to transport oxygen, which they breathe in pure form." "Pure oxygen?" gasped Medical Director Park. "That's highly corrosive." "Yes," June continued, "and they thrive in it. Their bodies are filled with metals and minerals that would be toxic to us. They digest organic matter through chemical breakdown. Essentially, they use controlled acid baths inside their bodies to extract nutrients." The display shifted to show a human in a medical bay, undergoing some kind of procedure. The doctors had opened the patient's body cavity and were physically manipulating organs. "Their medical practices are perhaps most alarming," June said. "They surgically repair their bodies when damaged. They remove and replace organs. Some crew members have artificial limbs or electronic implants connected directly to their nervous systems." "You're describing machines, not living beings," Minister Cho protested. "No," said June firmly. "They are very much alive, but they've evolved on a high-gravity, radiation-exposed world with an oxygen atmosphere. What we consider hostile, they consider normal. What we consider painful, they consider necessary." Defense Coordinator Han leaned forward. "What about their weapons? Beyond the nuclear?" June's skin pattern flickered briefly to deep gray, a sign of profound distress. She adjusted the display again. They use kinetic projectiles, essentially hurling metal at supersonic speeds. They have energy weapons that can cut through our strongest hull materials. But most concerning, she highlighted a section of the ship. These appear to be biological and chemical weapons, compounds designed to attack specific biological functions. They design toxins to kill other species, Park whispered. We don't know their intentions, Commander Sue reminded everyone. We only know their capabilities. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. The Tarek Collective had evolved, past warfare centuries ago. Their last armed conflict was nearly 300 years in the past. They maintained defensive capabilities, but nothing like what they were seeing. There's something else, June said quietly. Something in their behavioral patterns. Watch this footage from their training exercises. The display showed humans in what appeared to be combat drills. They moved with coordinated precision, communicating through short commands. When simulated system failures occurred, they adapted instantly, switching to alternatives without pause. They trained constantly for disaster, June explained. They simulate attacks, systems failures, even the death of crew members. And look here. The display shifted to the ship's recreational areas. Even during rest periods, many engage in physical combat exercises. They fight for pleasure? Someone asked incredulously. They call it sparring or martial arts. It appears to be both recreational and practical, keeping their combat skills sharp at all times. Commander Sue stared at the rotating image of the Dauntless. After nearly a minute of silence, he spoke. We are looking at a species that evolved on a death world. Their natural environment would kill any of us in minutes. They've built their technologies and their very bodies to withstand conditions we can barely imagine. He turned to face the gathered officials. And they have left their world and reached our borders. What do we do? Asked Han. Their technology is oddly mixed, advanced in some areas, primitive in others. We could likely disable their ship if necessary. And if we did, Sue asked, what then? Would creatures who can survive such environments, who train constantly for disaster, who build redundancy into everything, would they surrender? Or would they become even more dangerous? The High Commander straightened his aged frame. We will send a diplomatic vessel. We will establish communication. We will learn their intentions. And if their intentions are hostile? Minister Cho asked. Commander Sue's skin pattern shifted to resolute blue. Then we must be prepared for a kind of warfare we have not seen in generations, against an enemy who was born in fire and has made peace with death in ways we cannot comprehend. The Tarek diplomatic vessel. Peaceful dialogue approached the human warship with extreme caution. Sleek and iridescent, its hull designed for beauty rather than battle, it seemed almost fragile next to the angular, armored bulk of the UNS Dauntless. Inside, the Tarek ship's command center, Ambassador Jin reviewed final preparations with his team. All 6 diplomats were encased in environmental suits designed to protect them from what their scientists had determined was the human ship's hostile interior. Remember, Jin said, adjusting his suit's oxygen filters, we must avoid any actions they might interpret as threatening. These humans have built their entire vessel as a weapon. They likely see threats everywhere. Communications Officer Sun nodded nervously. We've received confirmation they're opening their docking bay for us. They've also agreed to adjust their internal atmosphere in the meeting chamber to levels we can tolerate, even with our suits. A promising sign, Jin mused. Perhaps they're not as aggressive as their ship suggests. The peaceful dialogue glided into the massive docking bay of the Dauntless. Jin couldn't help but notice that even this supposedly peaceful area had defensive emplacements and what appeared to be emergency bulkheads that could seal instantly. A small delegation of humans waited as the Tarek diplomats exited their ship. Jin felt a chill despite his temperature-regulated suit. The humans stood taller than expected, their postures straight and alert. They wore blue uniforms with various insignia, and while they carried no visible weapons, their very physiology seemed designed for combat. Dense musculature, quick eyes scanning everything, bodies poised to react. One human stepped forward. "Welcome aboard the UNS Dauntless. I'm Captain Park. We're honored to host the first official contact between our peoples." The translation devices worked perfectly, but Jin was struck by the human's voice, deep and resonant, vibrating at frequencies that triggered instinctive caution in Taric nervous systems. "We thank you for your welcome," Jin replied, performing the traditional Taric greeting gesture despite his cumbersome suit. "I am Ambassador Jin of the Taric Collective. We come in peace and curiosity." Captain Park nodded. "As do we. Please follow me to our conference room. We've adjusted the environment there for your comfort, though I understand you'll still need your protective gear." The human delegation led them through the ship's corridors. Jin and his team struggled slightly with the higher gravity, even though the humans had reduced it considerably from their normal settings. The Taric diplomats moved cautiously, aware that every surface, every device around them could be lethal without their protective suits. Jin noticed crew members watching them from doorways and junctions. Some showed open curiosity, others professional detachment. None showed fear. These were beings who had built their ship to withstand the vacuum of space, radiation storms, and apparently armed conflict. 6 strange aliens in their midst barely registered as a concern. The conference room was large, with a table of polished material that Jin's suit sensors identified as actual processed wood, a precious resource that Taric used only for the most significant ceremonial objects. The human captain had apparently arranged this as a sign of respect. As they settled around the table, Jin noticed that the humans moved with relaxed confidence, despite the historic nature of this meeting. Their body language suggested they were curious but not anxious. "Before we begin," Park said, "would a demonstration of goodwill be appropriate? We've prepared information about our civilization, history, and biology that we're willing to share freely." Jin's outer eyelids blinked in surprise behind his helmet visor. Such openness was unexpected from a warrior species. "That would be most welcome," he replied. "We have prepared similar information to share." The human captain nodded to an officer who activated a display system. Immediately, screens around the room lit up with images of Earth, blue oceans, green land masses, white clouds swirling in patterns similar to yet distinctly different from the Taric homeworld. "This is Earth," Park explained. "Our homeworld. Average surface gravity 9.8 meters per second squared, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, mean temperature 15 degrees Celsius, though with significant regional variations." The Taric diplomats exchanged glances. The casual description of such a high-gravity, oxygen-rich environment as home reinforced everything their scans had suggested. The screen showed humans living in environments ranging from scorching deserts to frozen tundra, from mountain peaks to ocean depths. "Your species shows remarkable adaptability," Jin observed. "Necessity," Park replied with a small gesture that the translator indicated was called a shrug, a dismissive movement regarding something humans considered unremarkable. "Earth has many environments. We learn to survive in all of them." The briefing continued, covering basic human physiology, technological development, and governmental structures. The Taric noticed that while the humans were forthcoming about their biology and cultural achievements, they were noticeably vague about their military capabilities and the full extent of their technological reach. "You mentioned you're an exploratory vessel," Jin said carefully. "Yet your ship appears to be designed primarily for combat." A moment of silence followed. The human captain's expression, still difficult for the Taric to interpret, changed subtly. "In our experience," Park said slowly, "exploration and defense often go hand in hand. We build our ships to survive whatever they might encounter." Before Jin could respond, a deafening bang shook the conference room. The Taric diplomats flinched violently, several activating emergency protocols in their suits. Jin himself felt his heart race as his body prepared for decompression or toxic exposure. The humans barely reacted. One officer touched a communication device, spoke briefly, then nodded to the captain. "Minor engineering issue," Park explained calmly. "A coolant valve released unexpectedly. It's being addressed." Jin struggled to control his breathing. What the humans dismissed as a minor issue had sounded like catastrophic failure to the Terek. The casual way the humans acknowledged and dismissed a potentially dangerous malfunction was more revealing than hours of formal discussion. "Captain," Jin said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "I believe we have gathered sufficient information for this initial meeting. We would like to return to our vessel to process what we've learned and prepare for further discussions." If the human noticed the sudden change in the Tarek's demeanor, she didn't show it. "Of course, Ambassador. We understand first contacts can be overwhelming. We'll escort you back to your ship." As they made their way back through the corridors, Jin noticed more details he'd missed before: sealed compartments marked with symbols. His translator identified as warnings for radiation, biohazards, extreme temperatures. Crew members performing maintenance on exposed electrical systems without protective gear. A training area where humans were actively practicing combat scenarios, grappling with each other in what appeared to be recreational violence. By the time they reached their ship, Jin had come to a disturbing conclusion. The humans hadn't designed their warship to intimidate others. They had built it simply to meet their own standards of normal operation. What terrified the Terek was just daily life for humans. Back aboard the peaceful dialogue, the diplomatic team removed their suits in the decontamination chamber. All showed signs of stress, rapid breathing, skin patterns shifting through anxious colors. "They live like that all the time," Communications Officer Sun whispered. "In radiation, in high gravity, breathing corrosive gases, surrounded by explosive pressures and temperatures." Ambassador Jin nodded gravely. "And they consider that normal. Now imagine what they consider dangerous." He turned to the ship's captain. "We must return to High Command immediately. What we've seen changes everything." As the Terek vessel pulled away from the Dauntless, Jin watched the human warship through a viewing port. Its harsh angles and reinforced hull now seemed less like aggressive design and more like the natural evolution of a species born to survive in conditions others could barely imagine. "They don't build weapons because they want war," he murmured. "They build them because their entire existence is a form of warfare against the universe itself." Captain Park stood on the bridge of the UNS Dauntless, watching the Terek diplomatic vessel shrink to a distant speck on the view screen. Something about their departure had felt abrupt, almost panicked. The first contact had been cordial enough, yet tension had hung in the air like an electrical charge before a storm. "They seemed jumpy," said Executive Officer Kang, voicing what everyone on the bridge was thinking. "Wouldn't you be?" Park replied, turning away from the screen. "Different atmosphere, different gravity. For them, our ship is probably a death trap." Kang nodded thoughtfully. "Still, that reaction after the coolant valve release was extreme. You'd think they'd never heard a pressure system backfire before." Lieutenant June at the sensor station suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple new energy signatures in the nearby system. Ships, a lot of them." Park moved quickly to the sensor display. The screen showed at least 20 vessels moving into defensive positions at the edge of scanner range. Their energy signatures matched the Terek diplomatic ship, but these were much larger. "They weren't there an hour ago," Jun continued. "They must have been hiding behind the gas giant's moon." They're moving to surround us, Captain." The bridge fell silent. Park studied the tactical display, her expression carefully neutral despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. First contact scenarios were always delicate, but this was developing into a worst-case situation. "Open a channel," she ordered. "All frequencies they might monitor." Communications Officer Ryu worked his console. "Channel open, Captain." Park straightened her uniform jacket. "This is Captain Park of the United Nations ship Dauntless. We notice your fleet's movement and wish to confirm this is not hostile action. We came to your territory for peaceful exploration and cultural exchange. Please respond." Seconds stretched into minutes with no reply. "They're continuing to move into position," Jun reported. "Formation suggests standard containment tactics." Park's mind raced through options. The Dauntless was primarily an exploration vessel, yes, but like all ships in the UN fleet, it was well armed. If the Terek attacked, they could defend themselves effectively, but that would mean failing their mission in the worst possible way, turning first contact into first combat. Try again, she ordered. Boost signal strength. Make sure they can hear us. Boosting now, Ryu confirmed, adjusting power to the communications array. On the Terek command ship, Guardian of Peace, Fleet Admiral Lee watched the tactical display with growing concern. The reports from Ambassador Jin had been disturbing enough, but now the human vessel was powering up systems across its hull. Energy spike detected, reported the sensor officer. They're activating something. Weapons? Lee asked sharply. Uncertain. Pattern doesn't match anything in our database. Defense Strategist Bay stepped closer to the display. They must have detected our fleet. They know they're surrounded. Lee's skin pattern shifted to resolute purple. He had reviewed the scan data personally. The humans maintained lethal conditions as their normal environment. They practiced combat as recreation. Their ship bristled with redundant systems designed to keep fighting even when damaged. And now they were powering up unknown technologies. While surrounded, they're testing our resolve, Lee decided, showing us they aren't intimidated. Admiral, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. They claim peaceful intentions and request dialogue. Of course they do, muttered Bay. They're outnumbered 20-1. They need time to fully activate their weapons. Lee considered his options. The collective council had been clear. Determine whether the humans represented a threat and take appropriate measures to protect Terek space. The evidence all pointed one way. A species that evolved in hostile conditions, built warships as exploratory vessels, and practiced combat as routine, would only understand strength. Prepare the pulse, Lee ordered. Targeted electromagnetic disruption. Non-lethal, but it should disable their primary systems. Admiral, protested his second-in-command, shouldn't we attempt communication first? Their actions communicate clearly enough, Lee replied. Better to neutralize a potential threat while we have the advantage. If they truly come in peace, they can prove it after we've secured their vessel. On the Dauntless, Park was growing increasingly frustrated. Still no response? Nothing, Captain, Ryu answered, but they're definitely receiving our transmission. I'm detecting active scanning from multiple ships. They're analyzing our comm system, Kang suggested. Maybe trying to verify it's not a weapon? Park frowned. Keep broadcasting. Make it clear we— Energy surge, Jun shouted suddenly. Multiple vessels charging some kind of directed energy weapon. Before Park could respond, the bridge lights flickered. Warning alarms blared as systems throughout the ship began shutting down. Electromagnetic pulse, Chief Engineer Song reported over the comm. Sophisticated one, targeted at our power distribution network. Park gripped the command chair as auxiliary lighting activated, casting the bridge in dim red light. Damage report. Primary power grid offline, reported Song. Communications down, propulsion at 20%. Weapon systems unresponsive. Park felt a cold certainty settle over her. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, this was an attack. Activate Protocol Omega, she ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos. Full defensive measures. Throughout the ship, hidden systems began powering up, secondary and tertiary backups designed specifically to withstand electromagnetic attack. Armored shutters slid over vulnerable sensors. Deep within the hull, isolated power cells activated, bypassing the damaged main grid. On the Guardian of Peace, Admiral Lee watched with satisfaction as the human ship's external lights and systems went dark. The pulse had worked perfectly, disabling the vessel without destroying it. Prepare boarding. Teams, he ordered. Full environmental protection. We'll secure their command center and— Admiral, the sensor officer's voice broke with alarm. The human ship, it's still operational. Lee turned back to the display in disbelief. Where the Dauntless had been dark moments before, new energy signatures were now appearing. Systems the scans hadn't even detected were coming online. Impossible, breathed Bay. The pulse should have disrupted all electronic systems. They have shielded backups, Lee realized, his skin paling. Defense systems we didn't detect. The tactical display updated, showing new weapon emplacements appearing from hidden compartments in the Dauntless's hull. Point defense turrets swiveled toward the Terek fleet. Armored plates shifted, revealing missile tubes and energy weapon arrays that had been completely concealed during the diplomatic visit. They anticipated this, Lee whispered. They built their ship expecting betrayal. On the Dauntless, Captain Park watched as the secondary systems came fully online. The bridge hummed with renewed energy as control interfaces reactivated. Secondary power at 100%, reported Song with professional pride. All essential systems restored, defense grid active. Weapons? Park asked quietly. Online and ready, confirmed Tactical Officer Hyun. Target locks established on all 23 vessels, awaiting your command. Park felt the weight of history on her shoulders. Humanity's first contact with an alien civilization had come to this moment, poised on the edge of war because of fear and misunderstanding. Hold fire, she ordered. Defensive posture only, and get me a direct channel to whoever's in command over there. Captain? Kang questioned. They just attacked us. Park's eyes remained fixed on the screen, where the Terek vessels had halted their advance. And we just showed them we can fight back. Now let's show them something more important, that we don't want to. The Terek fleet hung motionless against the stars, their earlier confidence shattered by the human ship's unexpected resilience. On their command vessel, Admiral Lee stared at the tactical display in dawning horror. The pulse that should have rendered the human ship helpless had instead revealed its true capabilities. What manner of beings were these, who built ships with hidden defenses, who prepared so thoroughly for betrayal? And, more importantly, what would they do now? The bridge of the Guardian of Peace had fallen completely silent. 20 pairs of eyes stared at the tactical display where the human warship floated, its weapons locked onto every vessel in the Terek fleet. The ship that should have been disabled was now fully armed and ready for battle. Admiral Lee felt a cold weight in his chest. In 300 years of service to the collective, he had never miscalculated so badly. The scan data had shown a formidable vessel, yes, but nothing had prepared him for this level of redundancy and hidden capability. Sir, the communications officer said, breaking the silence. We're receiving a direct transmission from the human ship. Their captain is requesting to speak with you personally. Lee's outer eyelids blinked rapidly. The humans had every right to retaliate after being attacked. Instead, they wanted to talk. Put it through, he ordered. The main screen flickered, and Captain Park's face appeared. The human showed no obvious signs of anger, though Lee was still learning to read their expressions. Behind her, the bridge crew worked calmly at their stations as if the near battle were a routine occurrence. This is Admiral Lee of the Terek Collective Defense Fleet, Lee began, struggling to maintain his composure. I take full responsibility for our actions. The human captain nodded slightly. Admiral, I believe we have a significant misunderstanding between our peoples, one that nearly led to bloodshed. You have every right to defend yourselves after our unprovoked attack, Lee admitted. The fact that you haven't fired suggests you truly meant what you said about coming in peace. Something like relief flickered across the human's face. Yes, Admiral. Despite appearances, the Dauntless is an exploratory vessel. We're equipped for defense, but our mission is scientific and diplomatic. Lee gestured to an aide, who quickly cleared the command center of all but essential personnel. This conversation needed privacy. Captain Park, I must explain our actions, though I don't expect forgiveness. When our scientists scanned your ship, we saw a vessel designed for war, crewed by beings who live in conditions lethal to us. When our diplomats visited, they saw a crew that treats deadly radiation, toxic atmosphere, and crushing gravity as normal. You practice combat as recreation and build redundancy into every system. The human's expression changed subtly. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You thought we were a warrior species, she said quietly. Weren't we right? Lee countered. Look, how quickly your ship recovered from our attack. You had hidden weapons we never detected. You were prepared for betrayal. Captain Park was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened, Admiral, I'd like to tell you a story about my homeworld. Earth is a beautiful planet, but it's also dangerous. We evolved in high gravity, with radiation from our sun, breathing oxygen that would corrode your ship's hull given enough time. Our planet has deserts where water evaporates from the body in hours, oceans that can crush with pressure, mountains where the air is too thin to breathe. Lee listened, fascinated despite himself. To survive on Earth, Park continued, humans had to adapt. We learned to live in environments that tried to kill us every day. And yes, sometimes we fought each other. But mostly we fought against nature itself, against starvation, disease, natural disasters. She gestured around her bridge. We build ships like the Dauntless not because we expect war, Admiral, but because space is even more dangerous than Earth. We put in redundant systems because we don't want to die if something fails. We train in combat because it keeps us physically fit and mentally prepared. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. For the first time, Lee began to truly understand the humans. They weren't a warrior species. They were survivors, shaped by a world that had never given them any other choice. When you attacked us, Park said, we could have destroyed your entire fleet. Our weapons were locked on all your vessels. A single command would have ended this confrontation. Why didn't you? Lee asked, genuinely curious. Because that's not who we want to be. Park's voice carried conviction. Humanity has a violent history, yes. We fought terrible wars among ourselves, but we've learned from them. When we reached for the stars, we made a choice to explore and connect, not conquer. Lee felt something shift in his understanding. He had interpreted human resilience as aggression, their preparedness as hostile intent. But perhaps it was something else entirely, the natural adaptation of a species born to one of the most challenging environments in the galaxy. Captain Park, Lee said formally, on behalf of the Terek Collective, I offer my sincere apology for our attack on your vessel. We misinterpreted your nature and acted from fear rather than wisdom. Apology accepted, Admiral, Park replied, and I understand your reaction. From your perspective, we must seem terrifying. For the first time in the conversation, Lee's skin pattern shifted to a lighter blue, a sign of cautious optimism. Perhaps, he suggested, we could start again? A proper diplomatic exchange, with better understanding on both sides. Park smiled. I'd like that very much, Admiral. Over the next several days, the tension between the two species gradually eased. The Dauntless powered down its weapon systems, while the Terek fleet maintained a respectful distance. Proper diplomatic protocols were established, with careful attention to the biological needs of both species. In one particularly meaningful gesture, Captain Park invited Admiral Lee to tour the Dauntless again, this time with proper context for what he was seeing. Lee, despite his scientist's concerns, accepted. Walking through the corridors in his environmental suit, Lee saw the human ship with new eyes. What had seemed like a hostile war vessel now appeared as something different, a craft built by beings, determined to survive whatever the universe threw at them. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Song proudly showed off the multiple backup systems that had saved the ship during the Terek attack. We don't trust single points of failure, Song explained, patting a massive power conduit. Every critical system has at least 2 backups isolated from the main grid. Like organs in a body, Lee observed. Song nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. If your heart fails, you die. We've built our ship more like an octopus. They have 3 hearts. In the recreation area, Lee watched humans engaged in their combat practice. What had seemed like violence for its own sake now appeared as something else, a combination of exercise, skill development, and social bonding. It's not about hurting each other, explained the ship's security chief. It's about challenging ourselves, pushing our limits. By the time the tour ended, Lee had reached a profound realization. The humans weren't fundamentally different from the Terek in their desires. Both species wanted security, knowledge, and connection. They had simply evolved radically different approaches based on their homeworlds. In the final meeting between Captain Park and Admiral Lee, they formalized the beginnings of what would become the Terek Human Cooperation Agreement. Your people have much to teach us about adaptation and resilience, Lee acknowledged. The universe is vast and often hostile. Perhaps we've become too comfortable in our safe environments. And your people have much to teach us about harmony and cooperation, Park replied. Humans are still learning to work together as a united species. The Tariq mastered that centuries ago. As they signed the preliminary agreement, Lee reflected on how close they had come to disaster. One misunderstanding, one hasty decision based on fear, had nearly sparked an interstellar war. Instead, it had led to the beginning of a partnership between two profoundly different species. Captain, Lee said as they concluded the ceremony, when our scientists first scanned your ship, they were terrified by what they saw. Now I understand. We were looking at something we didn't comprehend. Park smiled. The unknown is always frightening, Admiral. That's why we explore. To make it known. And to find friends among the stars, Lee added, performing the traditional Tariq greeting. Gesture. Captain Park returned the gesture perfectly, then extended her hand in the human custom of a handshake, which Lee carefully accepted. Two species, born to radically different worlds, reaching across the void to connect. Not despite their differences, but because of what those differences could teach them both.